we doing, folks? Your host Moose here on the Pitt Panthers Football Network as we welcome you back for our Season 6 Around the NCAA recap show. And we're going to take a look at how bowl season shook out, including the college football playoff. All right, and so let's take a look at our first playoff semifinal. It was Clemson taking on Ole Miss in the Orange Bowl, number 3 versus number 2. And you can see Ole Miss held off Clemson 26-22. I don't know why the scoring summary doesn't show up, but you can see the score by quarter there. Ole Miss was 16-7 up going into halftime. Clemson drew back to within 2 points going into the fourth quarter, and then Ole Miss 10-8 in the fourth to win this one 26-22. And it was a game where the Heisman winner Dustin Young and Will Alford, Clemson sophomore quarterback, had a great showdown. Both teams passed very well. They ran. The offenses were decent. Both teams were good on fourth down. Ole Miss probably could have won by a little bit more if they'd have been clinical in the red zone. They struggled there, as did Clemson, but turnovers really played the battle in this one. 3 turnovers for Clemson to just 1 by Ole Miss. You look at the stat lines. Dustin Young, 2 TDs against 1 interception, 311 yards passing. He also ran for a touchdown, 83 yards rushing, as he was really the only person that could get anything going in the running game. Leonard, their starting running back, really struggled, 14 yards on just 9 carries. Receiving was Jared Bowie, 5 catches for 87 yards and a touchdown. The guy's an absolute legend and the best tight end on the board should he go to the NFL draft for sure. John Thornton, 5 catches as well. Pravon Dean, their top receiver, had a long touchdown, 55 yards. Decent game for him. And then I know defensively, Harrison had an incredible day. 4 sacks, 5 tackles for a loss, 11 tackles in the victory. Absolutely ridiculous performance for the defender for Clemson. Alford, 331 yards passing. No touchdowns, though. He did throw an INT. Rushing-wise, Anthony Riggs had 22 carries for 86 yards, 2 touchdowns. Alford added a rushing touchdown as well. And then Ian Evans, 97 yards on 7 catches. Adam Chandler as well, 89 yards on 6 catches. Thornton for Ole Miss and Chandler for Clemson are both receivers that we invested a lot of recruiting time into and just weren't ever able to sign. So very interesting that both of them are showing the big games that they had. Nicholas Foster with a sack for Clemson as well in the loss. Then we move over to the Cotton Bowl, where Virginia Tech took on Oklahoma, and the Sooners showed the class. They had Virginia Tech a couple of garbage time touchdowns as well. They kept it close. Basically, they traded touchdowns late on, but it was Oklahoma 31-14 at halftime. Virginia Tech ended up going down then 38-14. They scored a touchdown to make it 38-21. Oklahoma made it 45-21. Then Virginia Tech added 1 more touchdown. So tough day for the Hokies. They didn't exactly cover themselves in glory, but they fought and battled. And again, it was one of those things where they just couldn't convert. Both teams went into the red zone, struggled. Oklahoma did have a couple red zone trips at the end of the game where they ended up just not scoring. And basically that hurt their percentage. But Virginia Tech, 3 touchdowns on 6 trips. 3 times they went to the red zone, didn't score. They had a turnover. They struggled on 3rd down. They put up yards. They just didn't win the game. Oklahoma, though, dominating on both sides of the football, or I should say dominating in both aspects of the offense, rushing and passing, were fantastic. And it was another day where Taylor Savage just showed why he may be the best player in college football next season at the very least. And he's even arguing for it this season. 3 touchdowns, 303 yards passing, no interceptions. Great game for the sophomore quarterback, former number 1 overall recruit. Washington with a really good game as well. Deontay Washington, 130 yards, 2 touchdowns. Savage added a few rushing yards as well, 47. Lacey had a touchdown. And receiving-wise, nice day, spread the wealth definitely for this Oklahoma offense. For Virginia Tech, Travis Huff was a Heisman favorite for quite some time. Incredible performance for him still in defeat. 3 touchdowns and a pick, 352 yards passing. His rushing did not provide as much as it typically does, but that's largely due to the fact that Virginia Tech was behind the 8 ball the entire game, right? They were losing the majority of this contest, so they had to try and get down the field quickly and pass it. But their rushing attack really struggled to get anything going. They fell behind early, and so they had to rely on the pass. Big game, though, for Jakari Thomas. 3 touchdowns, 140 yards receiving, 8 catches. Huge day for him. Ryan Winston in his final collegiate game, 8 receptions for 117 yards. I think it's his final game. I think he's a senior, if I remember correctly. He may be back this year. I don't remember off the top of my head. But good, solid performance for Virginia Tech despite the loss. And then we go to the national championship, where Oklahoma emerges victorious 45-28. Not the most dramatic of games. You can see here in the scoring spree, Oklahoma went up 21-0 on the back of 3 Taylor Savage touchdowns. Then Bowie to Young, or I should say Young to Bowie, was that connection that you always expect from Ole Miss, got them back into the game with a touchdown. Ole Miss went into halftime trailing 31-14, similar scoreline to what we've seen before. Then you end up with Oklahoma scoring another touchdown in the third quarter to really put things almost out of reach at that point. Savage to Brock Jones, his number 1 receiver on the season. Dustin Young did battle back with another touchdown run to make it 38-21. Ole Miss added a field goal, and then finally Oklahoma with a touchdown, Ole Miss with a touchdown, and then a final touchdown from Taylor Savage late on in the game. I'm not sure if this, remembering the game, I don't know if this is 100% accurate with the scoring summary, but either way, Oklahoma ends up with a 45-28 victory. You can see huge game for Taylor Savage, 424 yards passing, 33 of 43, 5 touchdowns, and just Oklahoma was dominant from start to finish yet again. Look at this, 7 trips into the red zone, 6 touchdowns, and a field goal. So every time they went into the red zone, they scored, and that's where you find their 45 points. Ole Miss was good in the red zone as well, but Oklahoma was just absolutely dominant. And what's incredible is Taylor Savage is going to be back next season. He's a sophomore. There is absolutely no way that he goes to the NFL draft next year. He can't as just a second-year player. He will be starting for Oklahoma next year. He's certainly got to be the presumptive Heisman favorite going into next year, as he just knocked off this year's Heisman winner in the national championship game. 5 touchdowns, 424 yards passing, almost a 200 quarterback rating in this game. Just an incredible day for Taylor Savage. He added 38 yards on the ground as well. Deontay Washington with a touchdown and 58 yards. Very good season for him. Receiving-wise, this was a day where all of the Oklahoma receivers broke out. Brock Jones with 117 yards, 2 touchdowns on 10 catches to cap off one of the best seasons in college football this year as a receiver. Coleman with 100 yards and a touchdown. Keys, 2 touchdowns and 47 yards. He's their tight end. Mitchell had a 100-yard receiving game on 4 catches as well. Terrence Mitchell. Great game overall for the entire Oklahoma receiving core. Very impressive performance. And then for Ole Miss, Dustin Young, he did what he could. He tried to carry Ole Miss to victory, and it just wasn't to be in this one. A Cinderella story for the Rebels, who have been perennial underachievers in the course of this dynasty story. They seem to have 99 rated teams every year, and then they go, 8-4, 7-5, or worse. Then the past couple of years, their ratings have gone down a little bit. I believe their team rating this year was 91 maybe, and they end up going almost undefeated, making it to the national championship game, but they couldn't complete the Cinderella story. 2 touchdowns, 286 yards for Dustin Young, touchdown rushing again for him as well, and 43 yards, so another big performance. Leonard did a little bit better, but again, similar to that Virginia Tech game, Ole Miss got behind the 8 ball early and just had to rely on the pass. Pravon Dean, 5 catches. Jared Bowie kept under wraps maybe a little bit, only 3 catches in this game, but he did have a touchdown for the Rebels. So a great national championship. Ole Miss, your national champions. And let's take a look at the rest of the bowls here, and we'll kind of flit through and see some top results. Oregon State knocked off Boise in the New Mexico Bowl. Toledo, Utah State beat Maryland in the Poinsettia Bowl. FIU wins. Arkansas State goes 12-1 on the season as they win the New Orleans Bowl. Oregon wins the Mako Bowl over San Jose State. Fresno, Wisconsin beats Ohio in the Little Caesars Bowl. You got Army with a big win over Buffalo in the Military Bowl. Colorado beats Oklahoma State. Northern Illinois with the upset win. Probably nobody saw that coming in the Belk Bowl over the Miami Hurricanes, who were very explosive offense, but their defense struggled in that one. UL Lafayette, the Raging Cajuns, beat Louisville in the Independence Bowl. Of course, your Panthers losing to Georgia in the Russell Athletic Bowl. Little recap of that one, as we always do after each game. It was one of those affairs. You guys watched it. It was pretty dramatic, but we just couldn't hold them off in the fourth quarter. Quentin Williams and then Travis Stewart with the run that we let him score on because we expected them to kick the field goal. Their kicker had been so good all game. Jay Keys, though, 70-yard touchdown pass. Benjamin Ogden, 50-yard touchdown pass. Davion Reynolds, 46-yard touchdown pass. So we aired it out with some big plays, we just couldn't make them late on in the game. Some turnovers and some just, general issues, as per usual, have plagued us this year. 2 turnovers, we lose the turnover battle, and that's what really hurts us, because as much as our defense struggled in this one, our offense kept pace. 381 yards passing, 167 rushing. We just couldn't keep the football in our hands, and that was really the deciding factor. Tough day for the defense, just really overall, especially giving up big plays here to Georgia. Georgia with how many touchdowns, and they only had 1 red zone touchdown, so we were letting up big plays ourselves as well. Player stats, C.J. Kirk, 381 yards passing, 3 touchdowns and a pick. A good game for him. Of course, he'd like to have that underhanded interception back that was a killer, as well as the fumble. Centarius Scott, of course, for Georgia, making some big plays there. So that was disappointing, but still a good game for Kirk. He ran for 38 yards and a touchdown as well, so he showed off that dual threat ability he has. Tough final game for a couple of the seniors. C.J. London was okay. He had that one big run on the triple option, but otherwise didn't get much going. He still has a lot of talent, though, and I like him a lot. Sibley just didn't get a ton of opportunities in this game, just the way we were playing. Reynolds was good, but again, same thing. Couple of big runs probably helped inflate his rushing averages in this one. He had a late couple of 20-yard carries that helped bump that up, but still 76 yards for Davion in the game. Receiving-wise, Reynolds, of course, had the big, long touchdown. Benjamin Ogden had a big, long touchdown. And the man of the hour, Jay Keys, 8 catches, 173 yards, and a touchdown in this one. One of his finer performances. And what's amazing is I'm sure it's down to the fact, although he had the yardage and the receptions, the majority of them while we were still in the lead, it seems like most of his big performances have come in losses. I remember the loss to Penn State in the 2019 season. 2 years ago, he had a gigantic game in. Of course, this one in the national championship, etc. But what a career Jay Keys has had. 8 catches, 173 yards, and a touchdown. In spite of the loss, it's a great way for him to go out. Ogden, I thought, had a great game as well. A guy that has struggled to really make note of himself, despite the fact that he has really good ratings across the board, really good speed, but he came up with a nice game in this one. Paul Lease and Antonio Greer, 2 of our more reliable players throughout the years. Disappointing they didn't get more action in this one, but it is what it is. Lease, we know, has had a great career for us. 4 straight seasons as a really good contributor. So shame to see them go out on a loss as well. Blocking-wise, Ryan Henry had a really great season. I thought finishes up with 2 more pancakes in his final game. Defensively, Jacob Lachlan led the way with tackles, though we know he had 2 or 3 big tackles that if he makes, who knows, we probably win this football game. That said, he still had a great game from the safety position. And was a guy that you could really count on. He and Avery Heller were both guys that have been really fantastic at just cleaning up defensively. Our first couple of seasons in the Dynasty, our middle linebackers seemed to be the guys always leading in tackles. As we move forward, it was Paris Ford. Now it's been Avery Heller and Lachlan, who've just been so good coming up and helping out the defense near the line of scrimmage and making tackles, and they showed that in this game. Heller with a sack. Calvin Carlson, his final game as a senior, as well as Lachlan's final game. Carlson with a sack and 3 tackles for a loss. Good game for him. Quell Hampshire had a sack in his final game as a Panther. So a lot of seniors we're going to lose. Ronnie Baker, of course, will be gone. Some very good contributors that will be gone going into next season, unfortunately. Kicking, Johnny Midday did miss a long field goal, so adds to his tally, but he still had a great freshman season for us, but he did miss a 52-yarder, I think it was, in the game. Eric Fox, his final game punting for us. Always been a great player and had really 4 solid years. Kick return, of course, Reynolds had that 44-yarder that at least gave us a chance at the end, and he's been a good returner for us this year. We'll see if he retains that job next year as he becomes even a bigger factor in the offense. Defensively, you can see Carter Ford torched us, 331 yards. He didn't have much. First half, he threw for about 130 yards, and it seemed like we kept their passing game in check, and they just ended up with some big plays in the final frame that gave them the victory. But a good game for Ford, and he showed what a talent he is. Travis Stewart, a guy that I talked about before the game as being under the radar, 200 yards, 2 touchdowns for him. Jackson Stroud's a guy for the future. He's a freshman. He had a nice performance as well and a long touchdown run. Travis Morris, we know he's the best receiver in the SEC for sure, I think, and one of the best in the country. Had a nice game, couple of big catches. Quentin Williams killed us. Had the touchdown catch, had the big catch, as well as Scott Irons had a big catch as well. When Georgia was trying to come from behind, they made some huge plays. Williams had the big touchdown catch. Irons had the catch on the final drive that gave them the opportunity to score the game-winning touchdown. Defensively, the big guy to talk about is Centarius Scott. 2 tackles for a loss and a sack. That sack, he also forced the fumble that Georgia recovered to help set up their game-winning drive. And then he had the interception as well that set up, I believe, the game-tying drive just before that. So Great game for Centarius Scott. Tough day for the Panthers as he made those big plays for them. Kicking-wise, their kicker was fantastic. He missed a really long field goal early on, but he showed that he was very good, and that's why we let them score in that final drive, because we knew he wasn't going to miss the game-winning field goal, especially if they ran the clock all the way down in this one. So a very fun game, disappointing loss, but really enjoyable if you were a neutral spectator in this one. Car Care Bowl goes to Iowa State. They're incredible. Michael Robinson's an absolute stud at quarterback for Iowa State. I think he's a Heisman favorite next season as well as a senior. This guy's an absolute beast. Take a look at his stats. 15 25, 175 and a touchdown, but then he runs for 127 yards and 4 touchdowns. The guy is a monster, and I'm excited to see what he can do at the quarterback position for the Cyclones next season. San Diego State with a big win. Notre Dame blows out Cal in the Fight Hunger Bowl. Valero Alamo Bowl goes to Kansas State over Stanford. Nebraska wins the B-Dubs Bowl over TCU. Florida State blows out Mississippi State in the Music City Bowl. Syracuse caps off a fantastic season for the Orange, 10-3, as they beat UCLA in the Sun Bowl. What a game for Syracuse. I don't know. Let's see. Quentin Bowling had a huge game as a senior, his final game to carry the Orange out with a victory. Cornell Washington, their stud quarterback, didn't have a great game, but they get the win. Kentucky beats Marshall. Alabama knocks off Cincinnati. This was the big storyline. Cincinnati going into the Bowls undefeated, not getting a berth in the playoff, and unfortunately they can't get the win. Alabama outlasts them in a very close game, so very impressive performance from Cincinnati. But the big storyline, their rushing attack, which had been so good all season, was not able to get much going on the Crimson Tide, and Bama, conversely, was able to run all over that really impressive Cincinnati defense. Cincinnati's defense was like number 2 in the country. Bama ends up putting up 470 yards on them. Cincinnati also struggled, you can see, in the red zone. 7 trips, only 4 scores was a big key. Matt Perry had a good game at quarterback for Alabama. He struggled most of the year, had a big game. But Brian Hand, 2 touchdowns in his final game for the Crimson Tide before he goes to the NFL. Darion Williams, 81 yards, as he's about to take over the mantle as lead running back for Alabama. For Cincinnati, Steve Williams, the transfer from Syracuse, had a great season, ends up passing for 314, 3 touchdowns, but Cantrell really struggled in this one. He'll be back next year, so I think Andre Cantrell is going to have a big year, but 50 yards in this one just did not do it for them. Big game, though, for Derek Wolfe. He'll also be back next year, 9 catches for 117 yards, expecting big things out of him. Iowa wins the Heart of Dallas Bowl over Texas San Antonio. LSU wins a classic in the Gator Bowl over Penn State, 40-34. Huge game for Kelly in that one. Let's see. Capital One Bowl, Indiana knocks off Arkansas 28-17. Great season for the Hoosiers in conference play. Michigan blows out Tennessee in the Outback Bowl to finish 10-3. I think Tate, if I remember, had a just gigantic performance here. And actually, he came out pretty early, 3 touchdowns, 145 yards. Miles Bigsby and Means, their backup running back, combining for 5 touchdowns in this one. Another just absurd game. USC outlasts Ohio State in triple overtime, Ohio State ends up scoring in the 4th quarter to tie it with like 10 seconds left. To force overtime. Incredible game there. It was 34-34. They traded touchdowns for 2 overtime periods. Then in the third overtime, USC scores. They get the 2-point conversion, and the first play of Ohio State's series, D.D. Harris throws an interception, and USC gets the win. So what a game that ended up being. USC 12-2 on the season, Ohio State 11-3. One of the best bowl games that we saw in the entire series, and definitely in this entire season. Both teams clinical in the red zone, scored every single trip down the field. Very impressive. Taylor Coleman, runner-up, remember, for the Heisman. 6 touchdowns, 447 yards passing, as he certainly booked his place in the top 5 of the NFL draft, I would think, for next season. What a game for him. Washington also ran for 129 yards. Jared DeLuca, 4 touchdowns, 9 receptions. The transfer from Rutgers came to USC this year and had an incredible season, and I think cemented himself into the NFL draft for sure. Big game for him. Hines as well with a great performance for Ohio State. D.D. Harris, 321 yards, 3 touchdowns. He's not known as a particular passing quarterback, but he had a nice game there. Lowry, of course, 89 yards, 3 touchdowns. The transfer from Stanford had a really nice game. And Kelly, their top receiver, with a couple of touchdowns. Fiesta Bowl, Washington made easy work of North Carolina because Anderson just couldn't hold on to the football. 4 times intercepted. He passed for 471 yards, but he threw 4 picks in this game. Conversely, Pearson, 5 touchdowns, 320 yards for the senior out of Washington. Florida ends up beating Texas 33-18. Clint Franklin with a final great performance for the Gators to win this one. Really strong day for him. Giovanni Perry comes in, has a nice day for Texas in relief of Brian Kelly, their quarterback. So excited to see what Perry can do next season as the starter. Franklin, 312 yards, 3 touchdowns. Great performance from him in his swan song. Fantastic game from Carter as well. I believe he'll be back next year, 128 yards rushing for the Gators. And then, of course, we saw the Cotton Bowl and the Orange Bowl results. Baylor wins the Compass Bowl. Texas State wins the GoDaddy Bowl. And Oklahoma, your national champion. So a bit long-winded in our recap of Bowl Week. Hopefully it interests you. I love seeing how the whole season shakes out. We're going to take a look around the NCAA and just give an overall overview of how things went before we move on into our Pitt team review next episode. All right, in our final top 25, Oklahoma number 1. Alabama somehow ends up number 2. I think it would have been more fair for Ole Miss to be number 2, but that just goes down to how they were ranked heading into the final bowl week, because Alabama played number 2 Cincinnati and beat them, so Alabama got a nice boost versus Ole Miss, who technically lost to number 1 Oklahoma, so they lose a couple of spots. But in the rankings, you can see Oklahoma, you're number 1. For Pitt, I think we do get a fair drop. We end up down at number 18 after our loss, 9-4. Probably reasonable. Georgia jumps up to 16, right ahead of us, as they did beat us. Ohio State finishes at 14. I think they could have been higher. Syracuse at 15. Impressive season for them. They're probably the biggest surprise on the list. Arkansas State always ends up in the top 10 because they play in the Sun Belt. We'll see how things go next year with a couple of new teams coming into the Sun Belt. But Arkansas State with a very good year this year. Tennessee ends up finishing 19th. Remember, they beat us earlier in the season, so unfortunate for them to drop that far in the rankings. North Carolina ends up 22. They beat us as well. And Toledo into the rankings at 24. LSU at 25. You can see the teams that dropped out following bowl week. We'll look around the country here. Of course, we know Dustin Young won the Heisman, but the other award winners, Travis Huff ends up winning the Maxwell. Great season for him after bowl week. He ends up with 50 total touchdowns, 39-4, 11 rushing scores. Coleman ends up second. Dustin Young third. San Jose State quarterback Tavares Cruz. He had a fantastic offseason, turned into an unbelievable quarterback. And look at the year. He had 24 TDs, 6 picks, 11 rushing touchdowns. Ends up 4th in voting for the Maxwell. Impressive season for him. Savage ends up 5th somehow. Clint Franklin 6th. Ben Guidry, Notre Dame's quarterback, was 7th. Steve Tate, Michigan's quarterback, probably number 2 in running for the Heisman if he comes back from Michigan next year after a very good season for him as a junior. Casey Pearson, Jason Reddick, another guy to watch for next year. The Arkansas quarterback, Jared DeLuca, we talked about him, USC senior receiver, 102 catches, 19 touchdowns on the year. What a season for him after his transfer. And Pravon Dean, Ole Miss receiver, ends up last on the Maxwell list. Walter Camp, Travis Huff there. We can see a couple of different players in here. This time, Matt George, the Auburn running back, had a very strong season for a very run-heavy team. Jerron Ware was in the Heisman race for most of the season, ends up dropping out late, but had a great year for Tennessee. He transferred in this season, had a great season. Will Brady, junior running back for Florida State, 1,300 yards rushing, 300 yards receiving, 16 touchdowns. Great season for him. So I like seeing a couple of different players. Isaiah Russell was in the top 4 voting of the Heisman, interestingly. He finished 4th, but he only ended up 11th in the Walter Camp. 22 touchdowns for him on the season, though, so very impressive year. Bednarik Award Best Defender went to Calvin Carlson. I think somebody like J.R. Ingram would have been more deserving just because of the way the game kind of overrates the tackles. Carlson had a lot of tackles, and so he gets help there. But he did have 2 sacks, forced a fumble, pass deflection, couple interceptions. So not a bad year, but I think somebody like J.R. Ingram with his forced fumbles, 4 picks, had 10 deflections. I think he'd have been more deserving on the season, but it is what it is. Hampshire and Laughlin got some votes there as well. Some really talented players in the mix here. Nagurski Award goes to Leonard Webster from UCF, the senior. We saw him, remember, in 2019 for UCF. Very good player there. You can see some other players in there. Junior Peter Stiegel, fantastic player for Texas. Watch out for him next season on their defensive line. A couple of really good players. Sophomore David Jordan for Texas A&M, another huge guy to watch out for. 10 sacks on the season. Really, really big year for him, and I think he'll be great to see next year. O'Brien, Travis Huff wins his best quarterback. We didn't have anybody in there, but you could see some other big names. Calicolio will be back next year, of course. Jason Reddick, another guy to watch out for. Doak Walker goes to Jeremy Butler from Ohio. He'll be back next year more than likely. And this is a guy, he has sights on some fantastic. If he can put up 2,000 yards again, he's going to be very high in the NCAA career rushing list. 4,600 yards already and 47 touchdowns in that Ohio offense. Jerron Ware was there as well. Clint Battle, fantastic, one of the best running backs in the country for Wisconsin, had a great year. He ends up with 3,100 yards in his career. Matt George, great year for him, 1,500 yards. Will Brady, a good year. Isaiah Russell, couple of fantastic seasons for him, almost 4,000 career yards. Rodney Wilson for Air Force, 3,600 yards for him and a almost 2,000 yard season. Deontay Gordon for Texas with a good year. Justin Martin for Ball State. He'll be back next year, so a good player to watch out for. Ian Welsh finishes up his career for Army with some great rushing numbers, 4,200 yards. Daniel Williams should be back for Washington next year. He had a really solid year. And then Lynn Brown for Mississippi State as well. Bolitnikoff goes to Ryan Winston, 90 catches, 17 touchdowns for the Virginia Tech, and he is a senior, so he'll be gone after this year, but a great player. DeLuca ends up second. Pervon Dean, the senior from Ole Miss, ends up third. Joe Sanders ends up fourth from Western Kentucky. Kyle Thompson from Wisconsin, the senior as well with a good year. Doug Ford from Boise, 81 catches, 16 touchdowns. Joe Casey Jr., he should be back next year. I would expect him to come back for Cal. Tavion Carter, true freshman receiver from Notre Dame. He's a player to watch next year, especially in the Heisman conversation. George Allen for Texas A&M should be around next year. Some really good players in that list. Bowie for Ole Miss, fantastic player, junior, but 89 receptions, 14 touchdowns. He's a guy that I would think should be at the NFL level next year. He's proven everything here. He's not going to have his star quarterback Dustin Young back next year. Might be in his best interest to move on. Kason, fantastic player for USC. TJ Perry, some good players in here. Keith Williams, of course, we saw for Georgia last year. Kevin Butler, a guy to watch out for next year. Underwood as well. Some really good players here. Butler, 63 catches, 86 in his career. He's been very good. Outland Trophy, Hobbs wins. We end up seeing John Cooper, our starting center, ends up 9th in that award. Doesn't win it, of course, but at least is in the voting. He's 3rd in the voting for the Remington, which is the top center. Hobbs wins that one as well. Ole Miss center, incredible player, probably a top 5 pick in the NFL draft. Montgomery wins the Lombardi, 10 sacks in his season for Louisville. Great year for him. Ronnie Baker ends up finishing 7th in that voting, 6 sacks, 20 in his career, so good year for him. Some other good players that'll be back, Mason, Chauncey Wheatley to watch out for next season. Best linebacker goes to Lance O'Donnell from FIU. Andrew Whitworth, though, sophomore middle linebacker for Florida. He'll be back next year. Very impressive player, as is Anthony Roth, the outside linebacker for the Gators as well. Some really good players there. Corey Charles Jr. for Texas A&M, another player in the voting. Carlson and Hampshire at least got votes for us. Best defensive back went to David Banks Sr. out of Texas. J.R. Ingram, redshirt junior for Florida. We'll see if he comes back next year. He's very highly rated. Could move on to the next level. Damian Hill from Tennessee in there as well. He will be going on to the next level. 5 interception season for him. Some Pitt players in the running as well. Casey Mayhew from Penn State. Youngling and Vector receiving votes. Corey Wilcox from Ohio, another guy to watch out for next year after a 6 interception season this past year. John Branch from Oklahoma, a junior. He'll be back more than likely next year, so some big players to watch out for. Johnny Midday wins the Groza in his first year. Very impressive to see. Again, I mean, he was good, very, very good. I wonder, a lot of players also deserving here. Maybe Abrams from Notre Dame, but definitely some good players in here. Marcus Johnson from UCLA, we'll see him again next season, so some good players there. Phillips for Alabama with a good season as well. Best punter ends up going to Eric Fox, the senior out of Pitt. great season for him, 14 inside the 20. Really good net, which I'm sure helped him out as well. But a great season for him, so great to see him finally get recognized. Some other players that we've seen on the season, Carter for Ohio State had a good year, Archer from Texas as well. Guys that'll be back next year, Nate Coe, Jared Robinson for UCLA, and Marcus Brady for Florida State. Best returner goes to Jason Williams, 2 touchdowns and almost 1,400 yards, or over 1,400 yards returning for Jason Williams of Texas A&M. Davion Reynolds, second. He did have 1 touchdown on a punt return this season. Fantastic for him, 67 yards. He was a good kick returner, 28 yards, but he does not win the award. Some other players in the mix there as well. Jason McIntyre, sophomore corner from UCLA, in there, as was Brian Harris, receiver for Clemson. So there's the awards. Quickly, we'll take a look at the All-Americans. You can see first team All-NCAA goes to Taylor Coleman. A lot of the players we already saw on the awards lists in the running here. We'll see if we get any Panthers. Quell Hampshire, Calvin Carlson, Jacob Lachlan in the first team All-NCAA, which is great to see. Second team, we end up seeing Dustin Young was on the second team, the Heisman winner, so that's always funny to see. Doesn't look like we had anybody on the offensive side of the football, but Ronnie Baker defensively, Malachi Bordeaux defensively, able to make the All-American team, as well as Avery Heller and Davion Reynolds, second team returner, so that's great to see. A lot of guys on our defense. We had a very good defense again this year and some great individual contributors. Now, All-NCAA, all-freshman teams, C.J. Kirk, all-freshman All-NCAA team. Davion Reynolds there, as well as is Miles Bigsby, Tavion Carter. They're some of the stud recruits that we knew were available in here. Talik Bird, some really good seasons for them, so guys to watch out moving forward next season. A lot of ACC guys as well. Jordy Andrews, true freshman for Syracuse defensive end. Clemson had a guy in Michael Morgan. Kavarius Black, true freshman for North Carolina. Florida State there. Tennessee had Corey Scott, so another guy to watch out for as we move forward. Kyle Poe for Ohio State. Jalen Lindsey, true freshman for Clemson. Unbelievable free safety. Paris Fontenot from North Carolina, he made an interception on us. Johnny Midday was the kicker. And Jason Williams, interestingly, was the All-NCAA returner as a freshman. All ACC teams, we'll just take a look at those and see if we get any Panthers on those. A lot of good players on here. John Cooper, our center, does make first team. Michael Collins, our right tackle as well, which is great to see. Malachi Bordeaux, a lot of defenders probably will be on here. Youngling makes it in, which he's our slot corner. I love how we have the entire secondary and we give up like 280 yards a game passing. It's just because they have really good stats tackles-wise. Jay Keys, receiver, All-ACC second team, so great to see him on there. Some more defenders make it in. Ronnie Baker, second team. There was a Carlson on Clemson as well. Chad Carlson, interestingly enough, makes it, so that's kind of funny to see. We'll have another Carlson still in the ACC next year. Conference standings-wise, of course, we finished 9-4. North Carolina technically won the Coastal, but they end up showing second here because Virginia Tech didn't get that ACC championship game loss, but good season there. Atlantic, of course, Clemson dominated. Probably your biggest surprise would be the good seasons out of Syracuse, and Boston College had a good year as well, definitely overachieving. I think NC State probably your biggest team to underachieve with a tough year. In the American, Cincinnati, the number one team far and away, but good years for UCF, Navy, and I thought Temple was good as well, as was Tulane. In the Big 12, of course, Oklahoma, your national champion, won the Big 12. Great year for them. Down year definitely for West Virginia. Iowa State, I think, is a team on the rise. They were 9-4 this year. And with Robinson, if he returns as a senior next year, he could lead them to really big things. Kansas State always seems to be under the radar. Big overachieving season for Baylor, but they're losing their stud senior quarterback, Adam Harper, to the NFL this year, so it'll be interesting to see how they rebound. Texas has an up-and-coming quarterback in Giovanni Perry, so I think they'll be good next year. Houston, 2-6 in conference after moving to the Big 12 this year, so a struggle there. And SMU really had a down year, 2-10, 1-7 in conference, but right on par with Texas Tech, so we'll see if they can rebound in arguably, I'd say, the weaker division of the two when you look at the teams as a whole, so we'll see how they bounce back next year. Big 10 East, Ohio State dominated, but Indiana, Michigan, Penn State always on their tails. Indiana, I think, a team on the rise for next year. They look very good this year. Michigan, of course, if Steve Tate comes back at quarterback, they're going to be very talented as well. Penn State, a team that's always in and around the rankings. Big Ten West, Nebraska wins the crapshoot that is the West. Wisconsin, Iowa, Purdue, all were in the mix. Nebraska ended up winning it on the final day with a win over Iowa and then lost, of course, to Ohio State. But Purdue I like a lot next year. I think their offense is going to be spectacular. Caden Mitchell at halfback's an unbelievable player, so he's one to watch out for. Probably the best player in the Big Ten. But Wisconsin probably the out-and-out most talented team, so we'll see how that shakes out next year. Minnesota definitely with a down year. We'll see what they do moving forward. Conference USA, Marshall, great season for them. 10-4 Conference USA Championship. Western Kentucky overachieved this year. Florida Atlantic had a good year as well. In the West, Louisiana Tech, of course, won, but who knows what's going to happen with this conference year in and year out. Independence, Notre Dame with a good year. Bowl win ends up taking them to 10-3. BYU, very down year, but they have a great team. Their offense is good, decent overall. I think they'll bounce back next year. Army, another solid year for them with that option attack. MAC East, of course, Ohio was spectacular. They could just put up points at will. Very good in another great MAC season. They end up winning the MAC, of course. Buffalo had a good year as well. I like them to keep being strong. Miami of Ohio seemed to be a strong team as well. Central Michigan with a great year. They end up losing their only MAC game in the conference championship game to Ohio, but a good year for them. Toledo, also with a great season, ends up as the only MAC team ranked, interestingly, despite the fact that Ohio won the conference. So that's kind of funny. Mountain West, you can see Utah State ends up winning the Mountain Division and winning the conference. Great season for them. Boise and Air Force right there as well. We'll see how they do next year. San Jose State, I thought was the best team in the Mountain West, but their head-to-head hurt them, and so Fresno State was able to get in on a tiebreaker before losing in the conference championship game. San Diego State had a good year as well. Disappointing year for Hawaii, who I thought was going to be really good this year. 86 overall team, 90 offense, and they went terribly. So we'll see how they do moving forward. Pac-12, Washington, another great year for the Huskies. They're good year in and year out. Of course, disappointing for them to lose the championship game and miss out on the playoff, but still a very good year and a New Year's 6 win. Stanford with a good year. Oregon probably disappointing with how their team is, but not bad. Cal definitely regressed this year. Oregon State definitely regressed this year after overachieving last season. Pac-12 South, USC back to their greatness, 9-1 in conference, 12-2 overall, and a fantastic bowl win, Pac-12 championship, and a lot to build on for the future. I still think you got to watch out for UCLA moving forward. They're always very, very talented, especially on the offensive side of the ball. They recruit well in California, and so they're going to be the toughest team for USC to face. Colorado with a good upstart season. In the SEC, Florida, of course, winning the East by virtue of Tennessee's late loss, gave Florida the berth in the championship game. They had a very good season. Tennessee really faltered down the stretch, lost to Kentucky in their final game to knock them out of the SEC championship game, and then got blown out by Michigan in a bowl game, so we'll see how that affects them moving forward. Georgia, I think, is a team on the rise. Carter Ford as a junior next year, I think, could really light things up, so we'll see how that goes. Of course, in the West, Ole Miss, do they regress with the loss of Pravon Dean, their top receiver, their top wide receiver, likely their top receiver, Bowie, the tight end, also going to the NFL, as is Dustin Young, I would expect. So they're going to lose a ton of pieces on offense. It'll be interesting to see how they go next season. Bama, always going to be one of the best teams in the country. Another good year for them. Arkansas, a team to watch with Jason Reddick at quarterback, as is LSU, because of Calicolio and just the level of talent that they have on their team. Sunbelt, of course, Arkansas State wins yet again, 12-1, 7-1 in conference. Texas State and Georgia State and Louisiana gave them a run. It'll be interesting to see how they do next year. Word that there will be some promotions from the FCS up to the FBS level, namely the likes of Appalachian State and Coastal Carolina possibly entering the fray in the Sunbelt. It'll be interesting to see if Arkansas State can hold on to their title. And finally, we're going to take a look at who are the best players in college football this season, as well as the best players overall over the last few years of the Dynasty, especially because as we move to college football revamped, we're going to lose all the old player stats, unfortunately, because I'll have to basically build a new Dynasty file to get rid of the team builder aspect of Pitt. So we'll take a look at who has the best career stats so we know who are the guys to watch out for going into next season as well. But Dustin Young, best quarterback rating in the country. That's why he ends up winning the Heisman. 4,100 passing yards. If we sort by passing yards, Taylor Coleman led the way, but it's the players that we've heard about all season. Coleman, Dustin Young, Taylor Savage, Anderson from UNC, Alford from Clemson. He'll be back next year. Watch out for him. Ben Guidry, Troy Butler from Boise, he should be back next year as well, so another guy to watch. Tavares Cruz, Tommy Fuller from Western Kentucky, and Travis Bolden from Miami, who should be back as well. Most TDs, Savage, Coleman, Tommy Fuller. I mean, it's going to be a lot of the same names you'll see here. James Williams from Colorado, good season for him. Calicolio as well, and there's Bolden, Butler, and Jason Jones from Northwestern, so a guy to watch out for next season as a potential really good player there. Leading interceptions on the season, Giovanni Perry, what a year for him. 9 touchdowns, no INTs. Great season for the true freshman there. CJ Kirk led the country in interceptions. The Panthers quarterback, true freshman. We know the good comes with the bad. 27 TDs, but 19 INTs, unfortunately. Utah State's quarterback. And Carson Moore of Troy, who's really, really good. He had a lot of interceptions as well, so that's a bit surprising, as did Jay Odom for Bowling Green. Rushing stats, NCAA, Jeremy Butler led the way, only got to go over 2,000 yards, and he won the Doak Walker Award for it. Rodney Wilson, Clint Battle, Ian Welsh, all the guys. Leroy Garcia, he'll be back for Ohio next season with Butler, so the two of them as a tandem combined for almost 4,000 yards, and they're going to be back next year. 36 touchdowns between them. Watch out. Lynn Brown from Mississippi State, Dorsey, a lot of seniors on the list here. Sean Garner from Arizona, a guy to take an eye on for next year, as is Mark Mackey for Louisiana Tech. Leaders in touchdowns was Butler, Wilson, Isaiah Russell to take a look at, Gates, Richard Gardner for Iowa State, who unfortunately for them will be going to the next level. So that's tough on an Iowa State team that's going to be good next year. Longest run, James Scott had that, 95 yards. Nicholas Engel, the QB for UTSA, 90 yards as well. Most yards per game, Rodney Wilson led the way in that regard. Most 20-plus runs, Davion Reynolds was 7. Like to see that. Broken tackles, Aaron Simmons for Stanford. Good year for him. Most fumbles, I guess we can sort it the other ways. Tavares Cruz and then CJ Kirk, so not great. We saw the turnovers that he had. Aaron Simmons, how many yards did he rush for? 1,500, so a really good season for him as well. Longest pass, we didn't look at that on the season. Most yards per game was Coleman. Longest pass, Chip Hampton of Kentucky. And then Aaron Miller of West Virginia, longest pass. Most sacked as well was Keegan Bentley from Temple. So we played them, of course, earlier in the season. They gave us all we could handle. We go to the receiving stats. Jared DeLuca led the way with 102 catches. This guy I couldn't believe wasn't on any of the awards lists. Austin McLaughlin, senior receiver out of Clemson. He's fantastic. 90 overall as a true senior. Really good player. He's going to the NFL next year for sure. 18 touchdowns. Didn't even get a sniff of the Biletnikoff. Couldn't believe that. Joe Sanders for Western Kentucky. Eddie Sanders for Indiana. Of course, there's Bowie for Ole Miss. It's incredible when you're a tight end and you're tied for 4th in the country in receiving receptions. I think he was 1st in yards, too. We'll have to see that here. Ryan Winston for Virginia Tech. Jamal Carpenter, San Jose State. Sam Howard, John Evans, John Hollis. Some really good players here as well. Most yards, and it was Bowie. Incredible. 1,500 yards, led the country. He did have an extra game over a lot of people, but still, DeLuca's there, McLaughlin's there. All these players we just saw. Biggest average was Colin Horn from Stanford. Most touchdowns went to Joe Sanders. Longest catch was Alton Robinson for Kentucky. Yards per game, here we go. This might be McLaughlin. Where is it? Yards per game. McLaughlin, 120 yards per game. Yards after catch, he's gonna have some talking to there. Maybe go visit a priest. But great season for McLaughlin there. Most drops, and he only had 2 drops, which is incredible. Most drops, Gerard Wade, 11 drops on the season. Akeem Reed, 9 drops on 38 catches is the one you got to watch out for, of course. Not great there. Blocking, most pancakes was Bob Roden for Ohio. Most sacks allowed was Burley and Wes Brown for Temple. Defensively, leading tackler in the country was Lance O'Donnell from FIU. Some really good players here. Kevin Terry for Eastern Michigan. Aaron Williams for Old Dominion. Most tackles for loss went to Leonard Webster of UCF. What a season for him, the outside linebacker. He had 11.5 sacks at outside linebacker. Incredible year for him. Ryan Harris for Arkansas State, sophomore. So he'll be back next year. 10.5 sacks, great game for him. David Jordan, 10.5 sacks, the sophomore from A&M. Montgomery, Roger Hawley, Eric Terrell. So some very good players here. Darrell White from Tennessee, Brandon McDaniel, Stiegel from Texas we talked about, as well as Adam Gandy from Ohio State. Some players to watch out for next year. Most INTs, Rivera for Georgia State, Herbert Moore from Fresno, Travis Campbell, Casey Mayhew, and Corey Mitchell. What about, let's see, most passes defended, Jimmy Cook of Bowling Green, Corey Mitchell. Again, what a season for him. 21 passes defended and 7 INTs. That's a first-round pick if I've ever seen it. Forced fumbles, Rodney Spencer. Ronnie Baker, 3 forced fumbles. Great to see. He didn't recover any of them, which is disappointing. But it is what it is. Blocks, 2 blocks for Kavarius Black from UNC. Safeties, there were a few. Most touchdowns, couple of guys with 2. Cameron Humphrey from Syracuse. We played them earlier in the season. I think he had 1 against us, if I remember correctly. We had a pick 6 in that game. So good game, good season for him. Kicking, of course. We'll load that one in here. It takes usually a second. And you can see Sims, most field goals attempted. He struggled, though. Most field goals made was Willie Stevens and then Johnny Midday. Best field goal percentage was Abrams. Longest field goal was Abrams. See, that's why I think he should have won the Groza Award. But it is what it is. Perfect extra points as well. Most 50-plus yarders. Let's take a look at that. Joey Blunt for Vanderbilt made 4, but missed a few as well. Punting-wise, best average was Travis Crooks from Old Dominion. Fox, you can see there, pretty high. His net was 2nd in the country. Very good there, and he had 14 inside the 20. Some other guys had more, but that's because they just had more punts. Longest punt on the season was Rutgers' punter. Kick return, of course, we'll just go best average. Todd Washington, Ben Stevenson, Reynolds. Touchdowns goes to Denman and Adam Dixon from UCLA. Interesting. Good player he was. Longest one was McLaughlin. Awesome McLaughlin again. This guy's everywhere. 104 yards. Punt returning. Best average went to Jason Williams, who won, of course, Returner of the Year. Reynolds was just behind him. Long one went to Williams as well. And finally, career stats. Best QB rating right now is Taylor Savage. Coleman just behind him. Most attempts in their career for guys that are leaving, Marcus Williams of Idaho. Their last season that they'll be in the Dynasty, and we at least get to acknowledge a very good Idaho player. 93 overall, Marcus Williams, the senior. Great career for him, 74 total TDs. Paul Henry for Hawaii, that's why I thought they were going to be good. He's a fantastic player. Ends up struggling a bit this year, but still a good career. Same with Troy Hendricks for Tulsa. Dustin Young, there he is, 932 career attempts. Brandon Matthews for Nevada. TC Ford for Arkansas State. That's a guy I definitely want to shout out. He's a stud. He'll be going to the NFL draft next year as well. That's one of those things that I'm going to include that in this dynasty, but I have to take the time because I'm using Madden 21, and I'm basically just going to sim through the seasons probably, but I have to put the draft class in, so I have to change everybody's names. I'll consider attributes, but I may just edit names and positions and stuff to match what they are so we can see how their careers play out. Most passing yards in a career, there's Marcus Williams. Then Dustin Young, second. Very good career for him. Henry as well. Casey Pearson from Washington. Very good career for him. Clint Franklin as well. Good to see him. Joshua Todd for Boise. Got to watch for next year for sure. Only a redshirt junior this year. I think he could be the reason BYU comes back big next year. Most touchdowns in their career. Dustin Young, number 1 guy coming back. Or number 1 guy graduating, of course. Savage, the number 1 guy coming back, 53 touchdowns. Most INTs in their career. Williams, unfortunately, the Idaho quarterback. Then Paul Henry, and then Troy Hendricks. Workman for UTEP. He'll be back next year. Anthony Cooper. So some notable players there. Yards per game, career best is Ben Guidry, the senior from Notre Dame. First year as a starter. I think he might have started at UCF the year prior, but I don't have his stats because of the way the transfer worked. Best completion percentage was Tavares Cruz, his only year as a starter. Very good career. Most sacks, let's see, Marcus Williams, 101. Rushing yards, career leaders right now would be Perry Smith, the senior from Utah State, graduates with over 5,000 rushing yards. Butler, of course, 4,600, and he'll be back next year. San Diego State, of course, you got some seniors here that have really good stats. As far as number 1 guys coming back, it's clearly going to be Butler, who's the stud. Rico Smith for Air Force as well, a guy to watch out for next year with really good career stats. Butler leads the way in touchdowns. Perry Smith, Isaiah Russell. See if there's any names I can pick out. Anthony Riggs for Clemson, really good player. I expect to see him at the next level. Yards per game. David Coleman, UConn. Interestingly enough, Coleman, he's probably going to be transferring in the offseason. He missed out. I thought he was a Heisman contender this year. Ended up getting hurt very early on and not playing much. So he's going to be transferring next year. You got to watch out to see what team he'll be on because UConn is disbanding their program. And so that means Coleman is a free agent essentially, and we'll see where he ends up next season. Miles Bigby, huge games for him on the season as well as just a true freshman. Excited to see what he does next year. 20-plus yard runs. C.J. London finishes his career with 11. Great to see. Receiving most receptions of anybody in college football. Jay Keys, 255 over the last 3 years. Pitt record. And it's a great swan song for him, an unbelievable career he's had. Austin McLaughlin, the senior second. John Evans there. Winston with a very good career. Trey Fenton from Syracuse as well. Navy with a good number of catches there, interestingly. And some players that you probably haven't heard of. Yusuf Miller for Alabama, really good player. Jay Keys, most yards as well. Best average is Joe Heath. Had one gigantic game this year, you remember, where he scored, I think, 4 or 5 touchdowns. Some players we haven't really heard of too much. Most touchdowns goes to McLaughlin, Winston, and Keys right after that. And then true sophomore Jonathan Payton, 28 touchdowns in just 2 seasons, 14 a year. That's absurd to see him that high. He's got a great quarterback in Carson Moore, and that helps him out. Longest catch, Sam Mullins. Most drops, probably Keys, 25. But he gets the ball thrown to him so much. And sometimes what they call drops are kind of unfair, but still a great career for Jay Keys. Blocking-wise, Sean Haynes. Defensively, I know the tackles for like our team are going to be all screwed up because anybody that runs over, I think 225 might be the max counter, which is why Heller's total tackles are screwed up because he has 203 tackles plus 16 assisted tackles and shows 91 tackles because I think the max tackle counter is like 125 or something. It's somewhere in there, 135, whatever it adds up to, that his gets kind of screwed up. I think it's 225, but he leads the NCAA in tackles. Tackles for a loss is Mike Nichols from Iowa State. Most sacks, Ronnie Baker, 20 in his career. Great ending for him. Most INTs is Whitaker of FIU. How about deflections? Is Tremaine Johnson of Buffalo. Fumbles, Spencer of the Aggies, New Mexico State, who's also going to be gone next year. Touchdowns, Jared Lowe, senior quarterback from Temple. So interesting to see there, as is Justin McCall of Kansas State. So really fun to just take a look at those career stats. It's exciting to see what's going to be coming next season. I know it's been a long episode. If you stayed with me the whole time, I really appreciate it. It's just so much fun. Helps add that immersiveness, especially because as we go to college football revamp to continue this dynasty, we're going to see the same players, but the career stats aren't going to be able to carry over. So I like to see them here so we know some of the big names we'll have going into next season. Of course, we will have these files to refer back to, but it won't be built into the dynasty file anymore. So as always, guys, thank you so much for watching to our NCAA season recap. We'll have the Pitt team season recap coming up next on the channel. So as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Hail to Pitt. We'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.